unto him. For his heart was lifted up. Therefore there was wrath upon him and upon Judah and Jerusalem. Notwithstanding, Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, both he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord came not upon them in the days of Hezekiah. In our lesson today, it illustrates to us how pride can become a stumbling block to receiving God's blessings that he has for us. You know, God responds to a humble heart, right? We learn how a mighty man here of valor that's named Naaman was healed because he finally humbled himself before the Lord. And however, like Naaman, we often tend to guide us to the safe path of humility. And it picks up with us here in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. And the king Naaman here, he is a military leader in the Syrian army. He's not from Israel. He's not an Israelite. He's a Gentile. And however, he's going to be appointed to somewhere where he can get some help, because Syrian, they worship pagan gods, okay? They didn't worship the true God of Israel, so he wasn't going to get any help there in Syria for this leprosy that he has. And a little young girl that was took captive by the Syrian army went to Syria as a slave. And so she did not have any kind of hardness of her heart towards the God of Israel for what had happened to her. She still faithfully loved and trusted in the God of Israel. And God uses her here to point Naaman in the right direction where he could get some help. And so there was a king there in the northern kingdom of Israel, King Joram. He was a descendant, the son of Ahab, and there in Israel. And so the Syrian king here is going to write a letter later on into the scriptures to this king of Israel. And he's kind of, and this is left out of our lesson text, this one part here where the letter was sent. The king there in Israel thought that this was a joke, thought that this was a trick, thought that they were fixing to go to war with Syria yet again here because of this letter that a pagan king would be wanting to send a Gentile to Israel to find this prophet, know of all of this. He didn't really know of what all Elisha had done. We know Elisha had done several things. He'd turned a pot of stew to where it was eatable, the poison that was in there, and different things that he had already done, being the prophet of God. And so we'll pick up here with chapter 5, verse 1. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. And so Naaman here, he was a commander in this Syrian army. The king of Syria certainly was very well pleased with Naaman's leadership, for it was through him that Syria had won many of their victories against her, respected by the king and the people of Syria. And from this terrible skin disease here that's called leprosy. Now, leprosy could be deadly, and it was greatly feared by the people. In Israel, it isolated those from leprosy, one from the rest of the society. And lepers were forced to live outside of the city walls. And so when anyone would come near those lepers to where they were or get closer in fear that the leprosy would spread to them. In Leviticus chapter 13, verse 45, and the leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent, and his head bare, and he shall put a covering upon his upper lip, and shall cry, unclean, unclean. And so touching a leper rendered a person that would be ritually unclean. He would become a Syrian commander was nothing really compared to his desire that he wanted to be made well. He wanted this leprosy to be gone. He didn't want to be unclean with this leprosy. And so old proud Naaman here was brought down. He was brought low by his suffering. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, it says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And so this is certainly what I think because he was so well respected and he had won so many battles. He just down. And so this leprosy has come upon him, and it certainly brought him down from his high place, so to speak. But he's still got that self-centered attitude. He's still got that better than thou. Verse 2. And the Syrians had gone out, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is all of the land, that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold. Now, in his wisdom here, God had planted this enslaved girl in Naaman's life to direct him to this much-needed remedy that he needed. We don't know why or why they would take her as an enslaved to the maid to Naaman's wife. She did the bidding, or took care. God often uses, right? He uses and he works his greatest miracles through some of the simplest of people. It's or got a big name, or has a lot of money, or lives in a fancy house, or whatever. He's using this simple little girl here, this simple maid that had been enslaved here in Syria. So common, ordinary people, just like you and me here this morning, God can use us for the simplest of people, for whatever his will is to be done. And so one of their frequent raids here that the Syrians constantly did at this time, they had brought back this young girl from Israel as a captive. And she was now serving here in Naaman's house and waiting on his wife. And little need here, little did Naaman know or understand that God was about to provide him here with a solution for his problem through. It sure does work in a lot of fascinating and mysterious ways. We know that. And he long before some type of need arises that they can help us with, right? That they can be there for us, to help guide us, to help us through whatever comes our way, whether it be sickness or whatever that to happen to us, right? For at least one time or another where we've had people come within our lives, within our church, within our families that help us when God does that, right? But so the slave girl, she went to Naaman's wife. She went and told Naaman's wife and told her about this prophet named Elisha that was in Samaria, which was Israel's capital there in the northern kingdom. And she told Naaman's wife that Elisha for him in Syria, but she knew of a prophet named Elisha that had done a great and mighty works for the God of Israel, and it was going to take him to take care of this problem for God. If we just get to that one person that we really believe has a connection to God in heaven and get them to pray for us, that everything's going to be made well, right? And we've all experienced that as well. And so Naaman was reported this back to the king of Syria. And so the Syrian king, he thought a lot of Naaman. He didn't want to lose Naaman as his commander of his army, because Naaman was a great. And so he was all willing to write a royal letter. He was going to write this to the northern kingdom there of Israel, and he was the son of Ahab and Jezebel. He needed to do to ensure that Naaman's healing would be done, that Naaman would be able to get to this man named to the king of Israel. But in those verses, it's not here. That king of Israel was concerned. He thought this was kind of like the Trojan horse here, that this was a trick, that he was going to be tricked, and they were going to be in battle or something that was going to be very bad happen. He didn't really understand why a Syrian king would want to be coming, sending this man Naaman into his kingdom to find this prophet Elisha when they don't even believe in the God of Israel. They believed in all those other pagan gods. It just didn't really make a lot of sense to the king of Israel. But everything goes to the king of Israel. And he took with him that silver, and he took with him the gold, and he took with him the clothes, and kind of maybe like a peace offering, if we want to use it that way, to show, or maybe as this was genuine, this was no type of trick. And so he took those large gifts. And Naaman was very close here. He was getting closer to that solution, to that remedy, to that healing of this leper. And we know that disobedience and pride, if I had a picture of it this morning, we could make it look like a wall of disobedience and pride, and we could see God on one side with the answer and us on the other, but we've let that get in the way, and God can't move. He wants a humbled heart. He'll still let his pride and things get in the way. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. His entourage, maybe his security guards, if we want to look at it that way, and these real pretty horses, and these fighting show that he was somebody really important. And all of this just comes and rolls right up in form and type of royal treatment by this prophet Elisha. He expected to be treated ecstatic and so happy like we would be if the president, Crump, came riding through Hickory and we standing out there. We would get excited, right? We would show that type of respect to him. But Elisha here wasn't showing old Naaman here, and he's not impressed with this show of outward glory, this show of entourage that Naaman had brought with him. So in sending a messenger to Naaman, Elisha was really making a statement here about Naaman's importance to him. Naaman had to be taught the supremacy of God. He had to be taught to humble himself. And so Naaman had to be taught this before he could be healed. And so Elisha just simply sent some instructions out here to Naaman by way of a messenger. He didn't go do it himself. He didn't run out there to see Naaman and tell him what he needed to do. He just sent the messenger out that he was to go and wash 7 times in Jordan, and he would be healed. It's almost like Elisha was like, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm this prophet Elisha, and I'm just going to send my messenger out there to tell you you ain't worthy for me to come out and tell. That's the way I look at it. That's probably not what Elisha was thinking, but it worked. It got old Naaman here to thinking a little bit, and it got him so upset that we're going to find out here a little bit later on, and was wroth, and went away and said, Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. So here's old brother Elisha, and not even seeing the face of the prophet, he thought, wow, I'm Naaman. I'm a man of valor himself. And so his pride, it flared up because of the treatment he had just received here. He refused to follow these very simple instructions that would heal his leprosy. God is not impressed with us, and he often uses a lot of unconventional methods to show us that he is absolutely sovereign, that he is in control. Naaman was furious. He was really upset at all this. He had expected Elisha really to personally make an impressive public display of his healing, that waving his hands and crying out to his God in front of all the people there, in front of this entourage that had came with Naaman. He wanted him to lay hands on him, I guess. Wanted to really put on some type of show of great power of this God of Israel. And he would send him home healed, and that'd be the end of it. And then what happened? That didn't happen the way Naaman wanted it to. Why? Because God doesn't do things just for show. He doesn't do things just to put everything out in lights and really make a show of himself. He don't need to do that because he's God. Naaman also argued that the rivers of Abana and Pharpar back in Syria were certainly much better than that old muddy river, Jordan in Israel. Here we are again with some pride and boastful, right? He was talking about how much better and how much cleaner and how much nicer the rivers were back home than this old muddy river Jordan. So he was, again, with some pride there and boastful. He didn't want to do that as the prophet ordered him to. He was angry, right? He got angry. He was disappointed. And he turned away, pouting, really, stomping his feet, I guess. But we know God is not in as much of a hurry as we often are, right? We want everything right now, don't we? We got DoorDash, we got Amazon, we got all these things. Man, we want it right now. We don't want to wait for it, right? But God's not in that big a hurry as we are. He patiently waits for us to really acknowledge him. And then things begin to move for us. Things begin to turn for us. Verse 13. And his servants came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then would he say to thee, Wash and be clean? Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, and he and all his company, and came and stood before him, and said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. God sort of was nudging at Naaman here. He was getting Naaman's attention through Naaman's servants. The servants started talking to Naaman. They started trying to reason with him. If the prophet would have told you to do something great and extraordinary because of Naaman's pride and the way he liked to boast, if it would have been something spectacular, Naaman would have been willing to do so because it would have went along with his attitude, with his self-centeredness, right? But the servants here were telling Naaman that you would have done it if it would have been spectacular. But why won't you just do something that's so simple? This is easy. You don't have to go prove anything out on a battlefield. You don't have to prove how great you are. You don't have to prove anything. You just really have to go do something very simple. Just humble yourself. Go get in that old muddy water like Lake Hickory. Go get in old muddy Jordan. We don't have to be back home in those nice clean waters that you're speaking of. Let's go do the simple thing that the prophet's asking you to do. They suggested that if Elisha had asked him to do all that, something great, he would have obeyed. So how much more should he obey when the prophet asked him a simple thing is just taking a dip 7 times in the River Jordan? I don't know about you this morning, but if God's prophet told me to go dip 7 times in the muddy Jordan or the old muddy Lake Hickory, and I would be clean, I couldn't get in there fast enough. I couldn't get there quick enough. But I don't have that arrogant, self-centered spirit here old Naaman's got. But I'd be in a hurry to get there, wouldn't you? I'd be in a hurry to jump in that water. So God's blessings come through our simple obedience. Naaman obeyed. He finally obeyed. The servants finally talked enough sense into him. The servants had more sense than Naaman did. So he did as the prophet had commanded. And guess what happened? His flesh was restored to being just like that of a little child. He didn't have to do nothing fancy. Didn't have to do nothing spectacular. He didn't have to swim 100 lap or run a meter race. All he had to do was dip down in that water 7 times. And he was made clean. His leprosy was gone. Naaman responded with humility. He finally had some humility about him. And he praised the God of Israel. He said, there's no God in all the earth but the one in Israel. That's the only true God. He finally realized that all those pagan gods and all those idols and things they worshipped in Syria was for naught, didn't do anything for it. There was only one God in all the earth that was able to do anything, and that was the God of Israel. And so he had discovered the wonder of the God of Israel. It often takes sometimes something bad to get our attention, and that's sad that it takes that sometimes, but it often does. It often takes something bad to get our attention, for us to get our pride out of the way if we have that, to get our self-centeredness out of the way, to get our boastfulness out of the way, and let God do the mighty work that he has within us. Many times when people are in a rage and they get upset, they are blind really to their own pride. They're blinded by their own actions. They're blinded by their self-centeredness. And so God often uses the people that's around them, just as he did these servants that was around Naaman. He uses people that's around folk like this to get them back on track, to reason with them, right? To give them some sense, to let them know that they need to focus on something simple. They need to get all that boastfulness and pride out of their way, get the self-centeredness gone. And so this is just what Naaman's servants had done here for him. They reasoned with him and they urged him to humble himself down and go wash himself in that old muddy Jordan River. And so Naaman, he needed to hear these words. He needed to be reasoned with of his servants. And he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan. And what a glorious physical cleansing and spiritual awakening that he would have missed had he continued in his pride, had he had just went back home to Syria and not went dipped in that water. He'd still be a leper, right? He still would have leprosy. He would probably wind up dying, right? He would be no more use to the Syrian king. He wouldn't have all the glory and all the honor and respect that he had, right? If he'd have just let that stay and then just went on back about his way. But Naaman, he returned. He returned back to acknowledge the greatness here of the God of Israel. And sometimes people reject the gospel just because of its simplicity, just because it's so simple. It sounds so simple that it don't even make sense to do it. That's the way some folk think. It seems too simple because it is all of God. God made it simple. Made it simple for us. It wasn't simple for his son, but he made it simple for us. That if we would just believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, that he came and he bled and he died for your sins, my sins, the sins of the world, that whosoever believeth in him wouldn't perish but have everlasting life. But some people make it so hard. But it's really very simple. But nonetheless, by humbling, accepting what God has done, we benefit, right? We benefit from his goodness. This once arrogant, prideful Naaman was now grateful to the prophet who had not even bothered to come out to meet him, didn't give him no special treatment, didn't treat him like royalty, didn't come out to meet him in person. And so God dealt with Naaman about his pride. He dealt with him. God knew how to get Naaman in the right spirit and the right attitude. We've got to get in the right spirit and the right attitude if we want God to move for us, right? God gave him grace here to change all of his prideful ways that he had. And there's a lot of people who will never turn to God for salvation. Why? Because of the pride that they have within their hearts. They feel they don't need God in their lives. They think that they've gotten so great and so good and everything's marvelous for them. That they have all they need and they can do anything and everything by themselves. And that's a sad point for some people to be, but it's truly the case. And we know that shouldn't be the case, right? We all need God. We need God and we need his salvation. Let us not have pride. It builds itself up in us. We want to live a life humbly before God and before people. We want to show the love of Jesus, right? We want to show that love everywhere we go and know that we are nothing without God in our lives. We can't do anything without him. We obey his simplest commands that he has for us. And we know that pride and disobedience can keep us from God's answers for us. We don't want there to be that wall I spoke of earlier of pride and disobedience that's causing us to have a barrier that's built between us and the answers that God has for our lives. In our lesson today, we've learned that God often does not work the way we want him to, right? He don't work the way we want him to, and he don't work when we expect him to. Sometimes God's answers are very close to us, and all it takes is us just to have that simple obedience, right, to bring it to pass in our lives. And so in order for us to obey, we have to shed our pride and accept God's plans that he has for us, even when they don't make sense to us. It didn't make a lot of sense to Naaman to be going and dipping in that old nasty, muddy Jordan River. He didn't think that made a lick of sense. He wanted to go dip in those nice waters that he had back home. But that was simple for him to have to go do. All he had to do was just humble himself to go get muddy water instead of clean, clear water that he had. We know that ultimately God always has simply the very best. He always has the best in mind for us, and he always takes care of us. And all we have to do is humble our hearts and be obedient to his commands, no matter how simple they are, no matter when it don't make a lot of sense to us. All we have to do is just trust, as the song says, trust and obey, for there's no other way, right? To be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. I trust you got something this morning, Mom. Will you dismiss us?